My brother laughed and said, "You're always going to be a failure, just like high school." Dad nodded. I said, "Oh yeah? I'm just evicting him from my rental property." And that day, my brother Jeff had always been the one to shine, star quarterback in high school, homecoming king, the one Dad always introduced first at family gatherings. I was the quiet one, the background guy. The responsible but unremarkable brother. When Dad joked about me being the family's charity case, Jeff would laugh and pile on. "Always going to be a failure, just like high school, right?" And Dad would nod, chuckling like it was just good fun. That day, though, as we sat around the dinner table, I noticed the usual smugness in Jeff's eyes. The conversation drifted toward old stories, Jeff's touchdowns, Dad's new fishing boat, and me. Or rather, their version of me. The underachiever, the kid who never quite measured up. Dad leaned back, his tone almost casual. "Remember how we used to worry about you? Couldn't even pass algebra, remember?" Jeff laughed, shaking his head. "Some things never change." I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest, but I swallowed it. This wasn't new. It was always like this. I'd learned to keep my mouth shut to keep the peace. But something was different this time. As Dad and Jeff laughed over my supposed failures, I felt a quiet, almost electric anticipation buzzing beneath the surface. I glanced at my jacket draped over the back of my chair. Inside the inner pocket was an envelope, an eviction notice with Jeff's name on it. After years of being the invisible, the loser, I was finally holding the cards. The house Jeff rented from some faceless landlord? That landlord was me. I had kept quiet about my hard work, the long hours, the sleepless nights starting my own property management business. I never mentioned to anyone that the property Jeff rented was mine. I had watched, waited, and now, as they laughed, I was ready. The dinner conversation turned to Jeff's rental. Dad asked, "How's that place working out? Still planning on buying it?" Jeff shrugged. "Yeah, maybe. The landlord's a pain, though. Keeps raising the rent." I felt a smirk tug at the corner of my mouth. "Really?" I said, voice steady. "What's he like?" Jeff rolled his eyes. "Some loser who probably inherited it. Thinks he's a big shot." The timing was perfect. My hand slid into my jacket pocket, and I felt the thick paper of the envelope. I pulled it out slowly, placing it carefully on the table in front of Jeff. He blinked, confused. "What's this?" he asked. I met his eyes, my voice calm. "An eviction notice. Effective immediately." The room fell silent. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Jeff's jaw dropped, his face draining of color. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet one. I wasn't the loser they laughed about. I was in control. The moment Jeff's eyes landed on the eviction notice, a hush fell over the table. Even the sound of Dad's knife clinking against his plate stopped. The laughter and smug comments evaporated into a tense, brittle silence. Jeff's face twisted from confusion to disbelief. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice catching. His usual cocky bravado was replaced by a stammering shock that made him sound small, almost childlike. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "I'm dead serious. That house you've been renting? I own it. And you're out. You've got 30 days. Dad's face turned an odd shade of red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. You own the house?" I nodded, savoring the moment. "Yes. I bought it a while ago. Fixed it up, rented it out. Didn't think you'd connect the dots, but here we are." Jeff was still staring at the paper, his hands trembling slightly. But why?" I gave him a cool smile. "Why? Let's see. Because I'm tired of being the family joke. Because I worked for it. Because I'm not the loser you've always made me out to be." Dad slammed his fist on the table. "This is ridiculous. You can't just throw him out like that." "Oh, I can't," I said, voice steady low. "It's my property, my right. Jeff hasn't even paid his last 2 months' rent on time. I'd be doing anyone else the same favor." Jeff's mouth opened as if to argue, but nothing came out. The confident, arrogant brother I had always known was gone, replaced by a man scrambling for footing. He glanced desperately at Dad, but for once, Dad had no words to save him. I stood up slowly, letting the chair scrape back across the floor. I looked down at both of them, feeling years of resentment finally, gloriously, turn into power. I suggest you start packing, I said quietly, sliding the notice closer to Jeff. You're on borrowed time. The room was thick with silence as I turned and walked away, the weight of my jacket feeling lighter than it had in years. I wasn't even to the hallway when Jeff's chair scraped back, the legs grinding against the hardwood floor. Wait! You can't do this, he said, his voice cracking. It was strange hearing desperation from the brother who'd always been the untouchable one, the golden child. I paused, half turning. Why can't I? Jeff's hands trembled as he picked up the eviction notice. Because we're family. I gave him a cold, level stare. That hasn't stopped you or Dad from treating me like garbage for years. Suddenly it matters? Dad stood up, his face dark with something between fury and disbelief. You're punishing us? For what? For a few jokes? I let out a soft laugh, the sound bitter and sharp. A few jokes? You've been laughing at me since I was a kid, calling me a failure, dismissing every effort I made. I worked my tail off to build something, and all you two could do was tear me down. Jeff's bravado was crumbling fast. Look, I know we messed up, okay? But throwing me out on the street? You can't be serious. I've got nowhere to go. I crossed my arms, my voice steady and calm. Maybe now you'll know how it feels to have no one in your corner. Like I did every time you and Dad called me a loser. Dad opened his mouth, but I cut him off. No more lectures, Dad. You always said I was a failure, but I'm the one with the house, the job, the business. And you? I gave Jeff a glance that was sharp enough to cut. You're the one who's been coasting on charm and family favoritism for years. Well, guess what? That charm doesn't pay rent. Jeff slumped into his chair, rubbing his face with one hand. Please, he said quietly, the arrogance gone. I'll catch up on rent. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't kick me out. I felt a twinge of something deep inside me, an old, worn-out reflex of pity. But then I remembered the years I'd spent being the punchline to their jokes. The sacrifices I'd made to get where I was while they dismissed me like I didn't matter. I already made my decision, I said, my voice quiet but firm. 30 days, Jeff. Get your things together. Dad was silent now, sitting back down, looking at his plate as if it could give him an answer. For the first time, I realized he wasn't furious because I was kicking Jeff out, he was humiliated. Humiliated that the son he'd written off as the family embarrassment was the one calling the shots. I turned and left the room, my footsteps echoing down the hallway as Jeff's voice trailed behind me, pleading, but softer now. I was done listening. As I walked out of the dining room, a strange calm washed over me. My hand hovered over the stairway banister, steady as if I'd been preparing for this moment my whole life. For once, the old tremble in my hands was gone. I heard Dad muttering behind me, low and almost inaudible. What's gotten into him? But it didn't matter. His words were hollow now. He wasn't the father who held all the cards. He was just a man grappling with the fact that his forgotten son wasn't so forgettable after all. Jeff scrambled after me. Wait. Can we talk about this? His voice was breathless, a mix of desperation and disbelief. Come on, it's me. Your brother. I turned at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at him. His face was flushed, his usual smug confidence nowhere to be found. Exactly, I said softly. My brother. The same one who never missed a chance to remind me I was a loser. The one who thought I'd always be stuck in his shadow. I was just messing around, Jeff said, his voice cracking. You know that. We all mess around. No, I said, each word measured, deliberate. You mess around. I clean up after it. And I'm done. Behind Jeff, Dad stood in the doorway, his arms crossed tightly, his face pale. For a second, he opened his mouth as if he were going to step in, but he stopped himself. It was like he'd finally realized his old tactics wouldn't work anymore. I can't believe this, Jeff whispered, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. You're really going to throw me out? I nodded. That's what a landlord does when a tenant breaks the lease and stops paying rent. Jeff's face contorted, his jaw clenching. You can't do this. I can, I said softly, holding his gaze. And I am. For a long moment, the three of us stood there in that heavy, tense silence. Jeff defeated. Dad seething. Me, finally standing taller than I'd ever felt. The weight of years of being the family's scapegoat had lifted, and in its place was something sturdier. Something mine. Without another word, I turned and climbed the stairs. Each step felt like a victory. I closed my bedroom door behind me, leaning against it as if to hold back the weight of years pressing against my shoulders. For a few moments, I just stood there, listening to the muffled sounds of Jeff and Dad's voices echoing from downstairs, low, agitated, punctuated by Jeff's strained pleading. The man who had always been so certain of his place in the world was crumbling in real time. I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. The quiet of my room felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else, a version of me who still lived for their approval. But that version was gone now. All that was left was the man who owned the house, the business, the future. As I crossed the room to the window overlooking the backyard, I heard a sharp knock at the door. Brian, Jeff's voice called, raw and shaking. Can we talk for a minute? I hesitated, my hand resting against the cool glass. In the past, I would have opened that door without thinking. I would have tried to smooth things over, to keep the peace. But now, I was done playing that role. After a moment, I spoke through the door. There's nothing to talk about, Jeff. Come on, man, he said, his voice breaking. Please. I didn't mean any of it. It was just stupid jokes. I could almost hear his knees hitting the carpet as he knelt. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with all the years he'd spent towering over me, only now he was the one brought low. But I didn't move. I stayed by the window, watching as a cold drizzle began to patter against the glass. It felt fitting, like the world was finally washing away the old, leaving space for something new. 30 days, I said quietly. That's more than fair. You'll figure something out. I heard him exhale sharply, a frustrated sound. Then his footsteps receded down the hallway. The house felt eerily still once his door closed. I turned back to the window, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. I wasn't just evicting Jeff from the house. I was evicting the person I used to be, the one who tolerated being underestimated, belittled, dismissed. This was just the beginning. The next morning, the house was quiet. I went downstairs, half expecting to see Jeff and Dad sitting in the kitchen, pretending like nothing had happened. But Jeff's car was gone. Dad was sitting alone at the table, a cold cup of coffee in front of him, staring into space. He didn't look up when I entered. He's at a friend's place, he muttered. Said he needed to think? I poured myself a cup of coffee, the scent bitter and familiar. Good, I said, taking a sip. He's got 30 days. Dad finally looked up at me, his eyes tired and, for the first time I could remember, uncertain. You're really going through with this? I met his gaze. Yes. He sighed and looked back down at his coffee. You know, you've always been so quiet. I thought you were just… I don't know. Too soft for this world. I never thought you had it in you. I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. That's because you never looked. You never saw past what you wanted me to be, the loser, the backup, the one who wouldn't fight back. I was trying to toughen you up, he said weakly. By tearing me down. I shook my head. You succeeded. I'm tough now. But it's not thanks to you, it's despite you. Dad flinched, and for a brief moment, I saw something like regret flash across his face. But it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a sullen silence. I finished my coffee and set the mug down. I'm heading out. I'll be back later. As I grabbed my jacket, Dad finally spoke, his voice low. Brian, what do you expect us to do now? I paused in the doorway, glancing back at him. Figure it out, I said simply. The same way I had to. And then I left, the door closing behind me with a soft but definitive click. As I stepped outside, the air was cool and damp, the rain from the night before lingering in the scent of wet asphalt. I slid into my car, the engine rumbling to life as I gripped the wheel with a steady hand. It was the first time in years I'd felt truly in control. I drove aimlessly at first, the streets familiar but seen through a different lens now. Each turn felt deliberate, a quiet assertion of agency. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me, the screen lighting up with Jeff's name. I let it ring. Then a text. We need to talk. Please. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone down, untouched. I wasn't ready to hear his apologies. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a small cafe I used to visit in high school, back when I needed an escape from home. I ordered a black coffee, sat by the window, and watched the world go by. The weight of old memories pressed down for a moment, sitting there with textbooks spread out, trying to prove to myself I could be more than what they said I was. And now I was. I thought about everything that had led to this point. The quiet determination, the sacrifices, the endless hours of work. I had built something real, something they could never take from me. Not this time. The door to the cafe jingled as someone entered. I glanced up, half expecting to see Jeff's familiar scowl, but it was just a stranger. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. I wasn't just evicting Jeff from the house. I was evicting their influence over my life. I had a choice now. To be the man they said I couldn't be, or to keep proving them wrong, one decision at a time. I sipped my coffee, feeling the bitter strength of it fill me. This wasn't over yet. But it was a start. The text messages kept coming, first from Jeff, then from Dad. They ranged from desperate pleas to angry accusations. You can't just throw him out like this. We're family. You've made your point. Let's just forget about it. You're acting like a child, Brian. Grow up. I ignored them. I spent the rest of the day at the cafe, thinking, planning. By the time I got home, the house was eerily quiet. Jeff's car was back in the driveway, parked haphazardly as if he'd left in a rush. Inside, I found him pacing the living room, his face flushed with frustration and desperation. Brian, look, let's just talk, okay? He said the moment he saw me. I'll catch up on rent. I'll even pay more. Just don't make me leave. I closed the door behind me slowly, my heart a steady beat in my chest. This isn't about the rent anymore, Jeff. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice rising. Then what is it about? Punishing me? Making a point? It's about respect, I said, my voice low but clear. For years I let you and Dad define who I was. I let you laugh at me, belittle me, call me a failure. And I kept my head down. But I'm done. Jeff's bravado cracked. I was just joking? I cut in. Yeah. I've heard that before. But you know what's not a joke? Me owning this house. Me deciding who stays and who leaves. And you're leaving, Jeff. It's as simple as that. His eyes widened, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for a comeback. But there was none. For the first time in our lives, the power was mine, and he knew it. Dad appeared in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. Brian, listen. Let's be reasonable. We're family. You don't throw family out into the street. I turned to him, feeling a strange, calm detachment. Funny. I remember you laughing when Jeff called me a loser. I remember you nodding along like it was true. And now you want my help? Dad's mouth snapped shut, and I saw it, the realization, the humiliation. He wasn't just losing control of Jeff's situation. He was losing me, too. I looked between them, my voice steady. I'm done being the punchline. I'm done being the fallback. You've got 30 days, Jeff. Start packing. And with that I turned away, leaving them standing there in silence, the walls of their old world crumbling around them. For days after that confrontation, the house was filled with an uneasy quiet. Jeff barely left his room, and when he did, He was pale and sullen, avoiding my gaze. Dad tried to keep up appearances, acting like everything was normal, but I could see the cracks forming in his usual bluster. There were no more smug comments at dinner, no jabs about my high school failures. Instead, the air was thick with silent tension and the weight of unspoken words. Every morning, I woke to the sound of Jeff's restless pacing in his room, followed by the hushed murmur of phone calls. I imagined him scrambling to find another place to live, a lifeline that might save him from the eviction he'd never seen coming. I thought back to all the times he'd called me a loser, all the times Dad had nodded along with his dismissive laughter. Now Jeff was the one losing control, and it felt like a strange, satisfying reversal. By the end of the week, Dad finally confronted me, cornering me in the kitchen as I poured myself a cup of coffee. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Brian," he said, his voice rough, "this has gone far enough." I set my mug down calmly. "No, Dad. It's just beginning." He scowled, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "This isn't how family works. Isn't it?" I asked, my voice soft but unyielding. "Family is supposed to be about love, respect, support. But you've used those words as weapons for years. You've made me feel like nothing, just so Jeff could feel like everything. Well, guess what? I'm not nothing." Dad's mouth opened, but I raised a hand to stop him. "You think I'm doing this out of spite? I'm not. I'm doing it because it's the only way you'll ever learn that actions have consequences. You called me a failure. You let Jeff mock me for years. Now he's the one being evicted. And you're the one who has to watch it happen." For the first time, I saw something break in him, a flicker of shame, or maybe regret. But it was too late for apologies. The damage was done. That afternoon, Jeff finally emerged from his room, his suitcase half-packed, his shoulders slumped. "I'll be out by the end of the month," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow resignation. "I found a friend who can take me in. At least for a while." I nodded, my heart heavy but resolute. "Good." As Jeff disappeared back into his room, Dad stood in the hallway, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. "I hope you're proud of yourself," he said bitterly. I met his gaze, calm and unflinching. "I'm not proud, Dad. But I'm finally free." That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I let myself feel the weight of it all, the years of being overlooked, dismissed, undervalued. The years of working in silence, of building something no one thought I could build. And now, here I was, not just evicting Jeff from the house, but evicting the past that had held me captive for so long. The power wasn't just in the paper I'd handed Jeff, it was in the realization that I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to prove myself to them. I had already done that, in the quiet, relentless work they'd never cared to notice. As I stared into the dim light of the living room, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in my life, I felt the solid ground of self-respect beneath my feet. The old labels, loser, failure, disappointment, were gone. In their place was a man who had built his own future on his own terms. And the silence that filled the house that night wasn't suffocating anymore. It was peace. A few days later, Jeff left the house for good. His car pulled away, packed to the brim with whatever he could fit. Dad stood in the doorway, watching with arms crossed and an unreadable expression. I didn't say anything. I just stood in the living room, feeling the shift in the air as the weight of his presence vanished. For the first time, the house was truly mine, quiet, steady, and finally peaceful. I sat by the window that night, a glass of water in my hand, and reflected on everything that had led here. I wasn't the kid who sat in the corner at family dinners, the one laughed at and dismissed. I was the man who'd built something real, and finally, I claimed the respect I deserved. I realized then that it wasn't just about evicting Jeff. It was about evicting the version of myself who thought I needed their validation to feel whole. That man was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who could stand on his own. And as the house settled into its quiet hum, I smiled, not out of spite or vengeance, but out of peace. This was the beginning of my life on my terms,